The slap sounded wrong in first class. Crystal hummed, engines purred, and then a sharp crack that made the cabin forget how to breathe. Silence. Glass trembled on its stem. An aisle light blinked like a shocked eye. Captain Robert Sterling's hand hovered in the air. Fingers spread, a gold ring gleaming as if it had done something noble. It hadn't. A mark bloomed on Serafina Hayes' cheek, the color rising like a warning flare. She didn't touch it. She didn't blink. She only looked at him, steady, unflinching, as if she were measuring the distance between what he thought he was and what he actually was. 10 minutes earlier, the world had been curated to avoid moments like this. Aura Airlines Flight 715 was a hush of warm towels and eucalyptus, the soft grays of leather against cashmere, a low, reassuring thrum from the Rolls-Royce engines outside the window. First class glowed, precise, expensive, and practiced. In 1A, Serafina sat in a charcoal hoodie and tailored black joggers, white sneakers planted, braid clean as a line drawn with a ruler. No jewelry but a pared-down watch, a slim Calatrava so understated it almost apologized for existing. On her tablet, fluid dynamics equations, nested like secrets, and a bit of code she scrolled with one finger, the way other people flip pages in a magazine. Across the aisle, a man performed status with a Louis Vuitton carry-on, jamming it into a bin that had already voted no. They make these smaller every year, he announced to no one, which is to say everyone. Chloe Martinez. Chloe on the name tag, hairpin neat, presence grounded, stepped in with the kind of smile that invited cooperation. Sir, I can gate check that and have it waiting at arrivals. It costs more than your car, he said. I'm not sending it to cargo for gremlins to chew. Chloe held her smile steady. It exceeds the size limits for safe stowage. Without looking up from her tablet, Serafina said, she's right. Loose mass becomes a projectile in unexpected turbulence. Best solution is to check it. The man scowled. And you are? A passenger who prefers not to get concussed by a suitcase, she said, voice even, eyes still on her screen. The performance ended. The bag surrendered. Chloe mouthed thanks as she whisked it away, the small victory disappearing down the aisle like a solved problem. Boarding settled into the rituals of first class. Jackets vanished into closets. Sparkling water kissed coasters. Seats became private suites. Then the cockpit door clicked open and authority walked out, as if it had been waiting to be recognized. Captain Robert Sterling had the posture of a framed photograph from the jet age. Broad shoulders, crisp uniform, silver at the temples. He didn't smile. He surveyed. He gave the luggage man a nod, a men-like-us nod. His eyes passed over Serafina in her hoodie and stopped, not with curiosity but with classification. Assistant, influencer, seat on points. An exception in a cabin that used to have rules. He moved on to the galley. Chloe, he boomed. The single word meant to gather attention like a whistle. Coffee up front tastes like battery acid. Brew a proper French press. Of course, Captain, she said, because there were forms one respected even when the people wearing them didn't. Was that a commotion earlier? Carry-on size issue, Chloe said, keeping it neutral. It's handled. You have to be firm. Give some people an inch, they take a mile. He didn't specify which people. He didn't need to. The shape of his meaning fit the air too well. He turned back toward the cabin and saw it. A water glass on the wooden ledge beside 1A, not on the coaster. Near but not on. A detail looking for a theory. His shoes clicked with purpose. He stopped over Serafina, like a cloud. Miss, he said, volume calibrated for an audience. This isn't a bus station. We use coasters to protect the finish. Serafina looked from the glass to the coaster a few inches away, then up at him. Apologies, she said, already reaching. Sterling lifted the glass first, as if snatching a proof before it could be corrected. Our crew's priority is safety, not cleaning up after passengers who can't follow simple etiquette. The line was slickly delivered for the gallery. It landed. The Vuitton man smirked. Two suits shifted as if to make room for the performance. I've apologized, Serafina said. Something cool slid under her tone, precise as a scalpel. Your point is made. You have departure duties. My duties, he said, leaning in, include keeping order for paying first-class customers. Some people need reminding. Do your reminders usually involve public humiliation over a glass ring? She asked. It seems inefficient during final checks. The temperature changed. Sterling's smile hardened, then vanished. Listen, sweetheart, he said, lowering his voice in his face. I don't know what lucky break put you in this seat, but this is my aircraft. My rules. Show some respect. The word sweetheart hung in the air like smoke. Serafina put her tablet down. Stood. She was not tall, but she stood like a fact. I understand you, she said quietly. You're a man who confuses a title with a character. You're unprofessional, and you're a liability to this airline's brand. Please step aside. The cabin tightened, the way a room does when a door slams somewhere else in the building. Sterling's jaw flexed. He had lived a long time in a world that answered to his timbre. This felt like a trespass. You have no idea who you're talking to, he said. I do, she replied, eyes steady. Robert Sterling, 22 years as captain, 2 FAA commendations in the late 90s, 3 passenger complaints for aggressive behavior in the last 5 years. She paused. Patterns are legible when you know how to read them. For a second, fear cut through his expression like a glitch in the simulation. Then fury rode over it. You think a few factoids scare me? On this plane, I am the law. The law is a procedure, she said. And right now you're outside of it. For safety, return to the cockpit and let your first officer handle departure. Something in him, perhaps the part that knew she was right, refused to be contained by the uniform that promised restraint. The movement was sudden and stupid. A fast, open palm, a slap meant to restore an imagined order. The sound cracked through the cabin and broke it. A woman in 2D gasped. Someone's phone started recording. Chloe, French press poised in the galley, stepped forward with a small, involuntary no. Serafina's head had snapped with a strike. Now it returned, slow and exact, like a compass needle finding north. She studied him, and what he saw in her eyes wasn't panic or pleading. It was assessment, triage, placement on a scale. Captain, Chloe said, voice shaking but present, putting herself between them. That's enough. Please step back. Sterling looked at his hand, as if it belonged to someone else. Fear flashed again, then was smothered by a blaze of justification. This passenger is a security threat, he declared, aiming for official and landing on unhinged. Remove her from my aircraft. Now. Serafina regarded him one more beat. So brief it was almost invisible. Then she nodded once, collected her tablet and plain backpack, and turned to Chloe. Thank you for your professionalism, she said, evenly. To Sterling, this will be handled. She walked up the aisle. The cabin watched consequences stand and leave. The jet bridge felt chill after the tempered air of first class. An institutional corridor with carpet tried by 1,000 anxious wheels. At the gate, the agent, David on his badge, was already fielding a call no training module had prepared him for. He looked up and saw the mark on Serafina's cheek and went pale. Ma'am, What's the tail number of that aircraft? She asked. He blinked. N4180. Thank you. She didn't ask for anything else. She didn't need to. She moved to a quiet corner with a view of the plane, of her asset, sitting glossy and indifferent at the window. Phone out. One contact. Benjamin Carter answered on the first ring. Sarah, there's been an alteration to my travel plans, she said, voice flat controlled. I was assaulted and removed from Aura 715 at JFK. Tail number N4180AU. The assailant was Captain Robert Sterling. Benjamin didn't breathe for a second. Are you injured? The injury is superficial, she said. The problem is systemic. He understood the message beneath the words. This isn't about pain. This is about design. What are your orders? Initiate Helios protocol, she said. Ground the crew in London pending interviews. Notify the FAA that a high-level corporate auditor was assaulted and flagged as a threat. Do not use my name. Lock evidence. Freeze executive authority under Clause 17B and protect Chloe Martinez. Understood. She ended the call. In the glass, the cabin behind her glowed. Perfect, curated, unchanged. The bruise on her cheek burned like a seal on a document. Inside 715, Sterling settled into a seat and exhaled as if he'd restored balance. Out on the terminal's quiet edge, Serafina stood with phone cooling in her hand and the city's light in her eyes. The slap had sounded wrong in first class. It would sound different in a boardroom. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. Night in New York has a different temperature after humiliation. Outside the terminal windows, JFK glowed in sodium orange. Inside, Serafina Hayes stood with phone and a bruise and no interest in sympathy. The ache on her cheek was a local event. The system failure was global. Benjamin Carter did not ask her to rest. He knew better. "My team is assembling," he said. "Give me your priorities in order. Preserve evidence. Ground the crew on arrival. Notify regulators without revealing my identity. Lock the tail number and manifest. Invoke 17B at dawn London time. And Ben, protect Chloe Martinez." She tried to de-escalate. "Done," he said. On his end, the war room woke like a nest of servers coming online. Lights, screens, a hum of clicking keys. "You're being followed by cameras?" "By indifference," she said dryly and ended the call. The airport was a theater that kept performing after the lead walked offstage. Boarding groups were called for other flights. Announcement apologized for delays unrelated to the truth that was about to arrive. Serafina stood in a quiet window corner and let her mind run its well-trained loops. The slap had been stupid, yes, but stupidity rarely travels alone. It travels with permission, with precedent, with the architecture of a culture that looks at a young black woman in a hoodie and sees a seat that must have been borrowed. When her car arrived, she didn't go home. She drove to a midtown office Helios leased under a series of forgettable names. Ben was already there by the time she stepped off the elevator. Sleeves rolled, glasses perched low. "We have the video," he said. 3 passengers sent it unsolicited to the customer relations inbox. My team scraped the metadata and mirrored it on our servers. The angle is unflattering to Sterling. "Reality often is," she said. He slid a folder across the table. "Union contract. Clause on gross misconduct. Your shareholder agreement. Emergency 17B is viable if we can show risk to brand integrity and safety." "We can," she said, and tapped the bruise with one fingernail, lightly, as if confirming a theorem. "Call the FAA Duty Council. Do not mention me by name. Identify the victim as a high-level corporate auditor. Use the phrase pilot-initiated physical contact with a passenger and ask for immediate license review." Ben smiled and reached his eyes. You always didn't know the words that make the machine move. He made the calls. It was not dramatic. It was a series of yes and acknowledgments recorded on lines that remembered everything. At 2:11 a.m., an FAA staffer who sounded exhausted and precise said, "We'll open a case file now." At 2:27, Orr's legal inbox received an automated notice that Flight 715's crew would be subject to interview upon arrival in London. At 2:39, a cloud service in Virginia held copies of videos that a PR team in the morning would pretend not to have seen. Across the ocean, London still slept. In a Heathrow layover hotel with patterned carpet and a lobby piano that played itself, Captain Robert Sterling sat at the bar with his shoulders back and his narrative fixed. "People are soft," he told his first officer, Mike. "You give them an inch, they storm the cockpit. We used to have standards up there. Dress codes, expectations. Now it's hoodies and disrespect." Mike wasn't old enough to remember the dress codes. He stared at the ice in his glass, then said carefully, "She wasn't loud or drunk. She quoted regulations, sir. And then she called me a liability to the brand." Sterling sneered. "Do you know how many lives I brought down safely? 2 engine failures in the 90s, commendations on the wall. That girl had no idea who she was talking to." Mike thought of the sound the slap made. He thought of the woman in 2D covering her mouth with both hands. "Sir," he said, "someone was recording." Sterling waved a dismissive hand. "Let them. Context matters. On this plane." "You are the law?" Mike didn't say the words. He heard them. He excused himself before he said something that couldn't be taken back. In his room, he shut the door and leaned his head against the wood. He'd seen captains bend procedures to fit their own reflections before. It never ended clean. In a different wing of the hotel, Chloe Martinez lay awake on white sheets that felt too crisp to forgive. The scene looped behind her eyes in cruel detail. The way Serafina stood as a fact to the posture, the way Sterling's arm moved, the way sound can turn a room into a lesson. She had wanted to intervene earlier. Training said de-escalate. Experience said don't get written up for undermining the captain. She had stepped in only after the slap, and it still felt late. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, then answered on habit. Ms. Martinez? My name is Jaya Patel. I'm calling on behalf of Helios Capital's legal office. Chloe sat up. Am I in trouble? You are under protection, Jaya said. The calm in her voice landed like a blanket. Per instructions from our principal, please do not discuss the incident with anyone but regulators and our counsel. Do not delete any messages. Do not meet with Captain Sterling alone. When you land, you will be guided through interviews with support. And Ms. Martinez, thank you for attempting to de-escalate. It's on record. Chloe covered her eyes with the heel of her hand. She hadn't cried at the gate. She did now, quietly into the call. Thank you, she said, embarrassing herself with relief. Rest, Jaya said. There's a meeting scheduled for 11 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Things will look different after that. The city began to turn. In Canary Wharf, Daniel Harrison, Aura's handsome, camera-ready CEO, was awake before his alarm because men like him made habit a personality. He loved mornings, the quiet offices, the feeling that the brand exhaled on his nod. He wore a suit the color of rich tea and practiced the first 3 minutes of his executive presentation out loud, as if the slides needed to be seduced. At 7:42, his personal assistant placed a tablet on his desk without making eye contact. Urgent, she said. From legal, subject line, notice of emergency authority, shareholder clause 17B, mandatory board session 11 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. Harrison felt a brief, almost adolescent bloom of indignation. Helios? Invoking the apocalypse clause? For what? An ATC fine? A social media storm? He opened the attachment and scrolled through language he remembered only dimly from a closing table 2 years and several congratulatory press pieces ago. Extraordinary circumstances, material risk to passenger safety and brand integrity, immediate freeze on executive authority, pending review, compulsory attendance. CEO, head of flight operations, legal, union representative, safety/compliance. George. He snapped into his phone, summoning his general counsel. Is this a joke? Helios is not known for jokes, George said in a voice that had never risen above a murmur. We received an FAA notice at 2:27. There's also chatter about a passenger video. Harrison looked out his window at the perfect lines of towers and felt a ripple of something unfamiliar. Not fear. He considered himself beyond it, but an edge, a lack of control. What happened? Preliminary. Captain removed a passenger for noncompliance, George said. But the FAA language suggests pilot-initiated physical contact. Harrison's stomach dropped through his shoes. He had just presented a deck titled Brand Excellence in the premium cabin to a private equity conference last week. He pictured the pull quote about human-centered luxury. He imagined it sitting next to footage of a captain's hand. Find out how bad it is, he said. Prep a statement about zero tolerance. Daniel, George said, and the use of his first name without sir was a warning. Any statement before 11 o'clock could look like obstruction. Helios has paralyzed our authority. Helios doesn't run this airline, Harrison said reflexively. There was a brief silence. They might by lunch. At Helios, the workflows move like choreography. Ben's assistants triage a universe into actionable items. Secure all JFK CCTV angles near Gate B. Preserve jet bridge logs. Pull rosters. Flag HR files. Prepare NDA-laced interview invites. A paralegal with the posture of an aero-drafted regulator language that would live in archives long after everyone in the room was forgetting their passwords. A data analyst built a heat map of customer sentiment on overnight social posts, italicizing assault, pilot, and first class every time they co-occurred. At 9:02, the head of flight operations received a calendar invite he could not decline. At 9:17, the union's email pinged with a link and a line that said, "Attendance mandatory." Frank, the rep, read it twice, then texted 3 senior members. "What is 17B?" They sent back variations of the same answer. "Bad." On the plane over the Atlantic, sleep took Serafina for 47 minutes in a chair in the corner of the Helios office. She set her phone to vibrate, placed it face down, and let the engine noise hum of New York be her lullaby. When she woke, the mark on her face had deepened in color and definition. It looked like a headline would look if it could bruise. Ben brought her tea and a list. FAA case number signed. Union has been notified. London interviews set. Board at 11. We've drafted your opening if you want it. "I won't read," she said. "I know." His voice softened. "How are you?" She thought about an 8-year-old version of herself standing in a science museum, hands clasped behind her back because a guard said don't touch, while a teacher explained laminar flow to a boy who cut in front of her and talked loud. She thought about all the rooms since where the algorithm had run before she walked in. "I'm consistent," she said, "and I am very tired of other people's certainty." Ben nodded. "Let's make them uncertain." By 10:11 Greenwich Mean Time, Canary Wharf's glass and steel reflected a sky the color of wet nickel. Inside a conference room with a view that had sold 3 previous CEOs on themselves, Daniel Harrison rehearsed a tone. He decided on sorrowful steadfast. He practiced the words, isolated incident, and even himself they sounded like a lie. At 10:53, the meeting link opened. Tiles populated. Legal. Flight ops. Union. Safety. George's box. Harrison's own face. Too bright. One tile stayed black. Helios Capital. The minute hand crawled. Somewhere in London. Chloe sat on the edge of her hotel bed with her phone clutched, waiting for instructions she could live with. Somewhere else in the same building. Sterling slept in late, then woke to his own reflection and mistook it for history's favor. At 11 hours, the black tile flickered. The machine, awakened, prepared to choose whom it served next. At exactly 11 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, the meeting tile labeled Helios Capital flickered from black to a windowed skyline of Central Park behind a pane of glass that looked like it never knew fingerprints. Benjamin Carter sat centered, crisp white shirt, navy tie, the kind of face that did not raise its voice because it never needed to. One by one, the other tiles stabilized. Daniel Harrison in Canary Wharf, backlit and too bright. George Legal, already sweating through his collar. Flight ops pallid and blinking. Safety/compliance peering as if into weather. Frank Union, filling the square like a bulldog shouldering a door. "Good morning," Benjamin said. The baritone landed like a gavel. "Thank you for attending under Clause 17B. We have a great deal to cover, and very little patience for euphemism." Harrison tried a smile that had opened investor checkbooks a dozen times. "Benjamin, let me begin by saying—" "No," Benjamin said, and a single syllable vacuumed the oxygen out of Harrison's tile. "You will speak when invited. First, we will establish the facts." He clicked something off-screen. Another window took over the grid. A portrait video, shaky with adrenaline. Maybe 2GS phone. The cabin appeared, softly lit and expensive. Then the camera steadied on a uniformed shoulder and a young woman standing to meet it. The audio was clear enough to be damning. "You're a man who confuses a title with a character." The captain's laugh, low and proprietary. "Sweetheart." The slap arrived with all the context it required. Nobody spoke. The sound of it, even compressed by a laptop mic, made men who had negotiated 9-figure aircraft orders glance down, as if their screens had burned them. Frank shifted first. "We haven't interviewed our pilot," he began, gravel harsh. "And this looks like evidence," Benjamin said. He paused the video on the frame where Serafina's head had turned back and her eyes had fixed on the man who'd hit her. We also have two other angles. They agree. Flight ops found his voice. It's bad, he said to no one. Or maybe to the future. Harrison cleared his throat. We cannot condone. You cannot PR your way out, Benjamin said. And you will not attempt to, given that emergency authority is frozen. We are not here to manage a story. We are here to describe a failure. He tapped the spacebar. The video resumed, Chloe stepping forward between them. Sterling's declaration, security threat. The recording ended in a blur of carpeting, a gasp, a muffle. Benjamin stopped sharing. The grid returned, ashen faces in tidy squares. Let's be precise. A pilot initiated physical contact with a passenger in first class. He attempted to recast the victim as a threat. Your crew's training failed to check him before he became one. Your culture did not equip a competent flight attendant to intervene sooner. And your first instinct, Mr. Harrison, was to tell yourself this could be contained. Harrison lifted his hands, palms outward. Benjamin, I'm not interested in containment. I'm interested in accountability. Aura has a zero-tolerance policy for her. You have a deck with those words, Benjamin said mildly, and a bruise that trumps it. He looked just off camera, then back. We are joined by the person most appropriate to receive your apology. Confusion rippled in the grid. Why would the victim be in a high-level emergency session? What was Helio staging? A new tile opened. Neutral background, white wall. A woman in a black turtleneck. Her posture composed, braid draped over one shoulder. The mark on her cheek had gone from red flare to darker bloom, a contour no lighting could hide. Harrison leaned forward, relief rehearsed. Ms., I want to say, on behalf of Aura Airlines, how deeply sorry. Stop, Benjamin said softly. Then to the room. Allow me to introduce Ms. Serafina Hayes, principal of Helios Capital. She owns 58% of Aura Airlines. Yesterday, your captain assaulted her. If the conference system had a sound for gravity increasing, the room would have made it. For a beat, only small, human noises came through the speakers. Someone exhaling too hard. Someone adjusting a chair that squeaked in protest. Harrison's expression moved through disbelief to understanding so fast it made him look both older and less practiced. The scripts fled. The persona sagged. He stared at the bruise as if it were a performance review handwritten on a face. Serafina did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Mr. Harrison, she said, as if the entire session were a private call. For 2 years I have allowed you discretion, budgets, hires, branding, training frameworks. I read your reports. They were beautifully presented. Yesterday, your culture presented me with something else. She gestured, not quite touching her cheek. This is not my injury. This is your metric. This is what tolerance for arrogance buys when it matures. Frank bristled in his tile, finding the only ground he knew. Our pilots, our members, deserve due process. There are stressors you may not appreciate. A captain's responsibility is to not hit passengers, Serafina said. The calm in her voice, the way she didn't look away, made the sentence heavier than any shout. Mr. Franklin, if your union chooses to defend Captain Sterling's license without qualification, my counsel will interpret that as endorsement of his conduct. We will begin exploring other labor partnerships. Please be very clear with your members about how much appetite I have for euphemism. Frank's jaw worked. We will review Ms. Hayes. The Ms. Hayes sounded like a concession extracted from bone. George, tiny in his tile, tried to find a legal contour. From a liability standpoint, the phrasing of any public statement should avoid. No, she said, the phrasing will not avoid. It will name. A pilot assaulted a black woman in first class. You'll say it like that, or your brand will learn what a sell-off sounds like. Harrison lifted his gaze, eyes glassy, voice smaller than he was used to hearing through his own ears. You're going to liquidate? I have 2 options, Serafina said. She leaned forward slightly. Across a few thousand miles of fiber optic cable, the room leaned with her. Option 1. I instruct our broker to begin selling all 58% of our stake at 11:15 a.m. The market will behave like markets do. By Christmas, You'll be a cautionary case study about arrogance, euphemism, and the perils of confusing a press release with a culture. Flight ops went a shade lighter. Safety/compliance stared at the edge of their screen like a cliff. Option 2, she continued, is that we treat this as a failure it truly is, a systems failure, and we rebuild the system. You will remain, for the moment, Mr. Harrison, as a figurehead, but your authority is suspended. It goes where it should have been, to oversight built outside your reflexes. We will burn the rot and keep the spine. Harrison swallowed. What does that mean specifically? She enumerated, not with bullets on a slide, but with the clarity of scientists stating conditions. Captain Sterling is terminated for cause. His pension is forfeited under the gross misconduct clause. The records and footage are shared with regulators and civil authorities. An independent civilian oversight and inclusivity board is formed immediately with authority over training, hiring, and discipline. Its director will be my selection. A sanctuary protocol is established for crew who report misconduct, even by captains, so that they are shielded from retaliation at the manager level. Chloe Martinez is promoted and compensated. She will help write your new de-escalation training. Frank rubbed a hand over his face. You're recasting our structures unilaterally. I'm changing what I own, she said simply. Unilaterally is how ownership works when the house is on fire. Ms. Hayes, George said quietly, we'll need time to... You have 60 seconds, she said. At 11:15, if I don't have a yes to all terms on record, option 1 triggers automatically. I already drafted the market order. Mr. Carter holds a button. Benjamin lifted one eyebrow almost imperceptibly, as if to second the motion. Harrison's mouth opened and closed once, like a man surfacing in cold water and failing to remember the stroke. In his tile, the towers of Canary Wharf looked suddenly like the bars of a very elegant cage. He was good at speeches about excellence. He had never practiced surrender. Before you answer, Serafina added, understand I did not build anything I own by craving spectacle. I prefer quiet systems at work. But quiet is not the same as silence. When the algorithm returns a result like yesterday, you don't adjust the display. You rewrite the code. She leaned back. The bruise caught the light like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence nobody wanted to read. The room made the noises rooms make when men forget how to be important. A chair creak, the click of a pen, the faint buzz of a desk lamp. Somewhere off-screen, a clock ticked. Benjamin watched the grid the way a conductor watches a symphony that knows the next note and fears it. 50 seconds, he said, almost kindly. Harrison closed his eyes. When he opened them, the PR smile was gone, and with the illusion that he could shape this with tone alone. He looked briefly, like a person who had learned something late. We, he began, voice rough. The word trailed off into the count. 40 seconds, Benjamin said. The grid held its breath. In the pause, everyone could hear it. Not the slap, not the engines, just the machinery of consequence coming to life, choosing a direction. 30 seconds, Benjamin said, and the silence acquired weight. Daniel Harrison looked less like a CEO than a man lowering a knife he didn't remember picking up. We accept, he said, voice hoarse. All terms. On record, Benjamin replied. Documents are in your inbox. Sign them within 5 minutes. Paperless thunder rolled across the grid. Pings, vibrations, the digital clatter of signatures becoming binding. In a quiet corner of Helios, a paralegal pressed send on a packet titled Sterling. Termination for cause. In London, a hotel printer coughed it into the world next to a concierge who suddenly stood up straighter. Within 12 minutes, Aura Airlines issued a press statement that did not hide behind fog. It named Captain Robert Sterling. It named assault. It named the victim as a black woman in first class. No euphemisms. No gentle lies. The sentence landed on timelines like a dropped wrench. For Robert Sterling, the news arrived first as a notification on his phone. CNN alert. Aura pilot terminated after assault on passenger. FAA investigates. His name followed, never again alone. He stared until the screen dimmed. When he lifted his eyes, his room looked different. Same carpet, Same curtains, but as if reality had taken a half step away from him. The knock came. Hotel security. Then 2 civil aviation investigators and 1 airline HR representative doing the job no one wanted. Sterling handed over his ID lanyard and access cards with fingers that had once flicked switches without doubt. The HR rep's script quavered once and then steadied. For cause gross misconduct clause, pension forfeiture, cooperate with regulators. Words like bolts tightening. Your union, Sterling said, reaching for the last structure he believed couldn't move, will... Mr. Franklin will accompany you to interviews, the investigator said. Representation is your right. Defense is not your absolution. He called home and got the kind of silence that knows your name. He called old colleagues and heard new hesitations. He left the room because walls narrowed and found himself on the sidewalk outside the hotel, staring at buses that stopped and started on time, as if the world were a device he had never learned to operate. Back in New York, the reconstruction had a conductor, Dr. Anna Sharma, hair in a severe bun, eyes with the warmth of someone who remembers names and the cold of someone who remembers data, stepped into a temporary office at Aura headquarters that had been cleared as if for surgery. The Oversight Board's mandate, she said to a cluster of executives who stood like furniture, is not to decorate your brand. It is to govern what you actually are. We will own hiring matrices, training content, disciplinary reviews, and the first and last word on safety culture. She clicked to a slide that was not a slide so much as a roadmap. Bias interrupts, bystander protocols, sanctuary cabin, metrics that matter. What are our metrics? Harrison asked, stripped of charisma, ready to be told. Latency to intervene, Dr. Sharma said. Complaint to action time, bystander activation rate, retaliation incidents, 0 tolerance. We'll also measure something else, the difference between how people talk in rooms like this and how they behave in cabins like that. The first sanctuary cabin protocol briefing felt like an amnesty and a dare. Crews filed with arms crossed, skeptical, stung, afraid of being told they were a problem. Dr. Sharma began with the video. Not to humiliate, she said, but to make an artifact of failure. The slap echoed in the training hall, and people flinched as if sound could correct a posture. Then she laid out the system as if installing a safety feature. Anonymous reporting channels routed outside immediate management. Encrypted logs. A third-party review with the board, not supervisors. Holding the gavel. Immediate protective status for the reporter. Retaliation domain flagged to legal in real time. If you are brave enough to raise your hand, the organization must be brave enough to hold you up, she said. From today, the rules will hold. Hands went up. A senior purser asked how Anonymous really worked. A young FA asked what happened if the person retaliating was popular. A pilot in his 40s wanted to know what this meant for cockpit authority. Dr. Sharma answered without flinching. Authority remained. Impunity dissolved. Safety narrowed. Respect broadened. This isn't a pendulum swing, she said. It's scaffolding. In a smaller room down the hall, Chloe Martinez sat across from Benjamin's deputy and an HR executive who looked like she wanted to perform penance. Ms. Martinez, the deputy said, the board has accepted Ms. Hayes' recommendation. Effective immediately, you are promoted to lead on-cabin de-escalation training under Dr. Sharma, with commensurate raise and bonus. The HR executive slid a folder forward like an apology. Salary, title, options that felt unreal. Chloe stared. I thought I was going to be written up. You were written down, the deputy said, half smiling, on a list of people to protect. She left the room and stood in a corridor that smelled faintly of copier toner and sudden air. Her hands shook. She texted her mother 3 words. It's okay now. Within 48 hours, industry noticed. Rival airlines, their legal team suddenly curious, requested calls with Dr. Sharma, not to congratulate but to audit for threat and opportunity. Trade publications ran features about the frankest apology in aviation history, with quotes from brand consultants whose teeth glinted. Stocks dipped, then steadied, then rose half a point. When the market realized truth had replaced theater, pilots' forums lit up. Some rage, some shame, some relief that the rules were finally going to be clear enough to follow. Not everyone stayed. A handful of old guard captains requested early retirement in emails that used the word woke like a tourniquet. They left. New hires arrived through a selection process that looked less like a secret handshake and more like a lab protocol. Technical excellence required, yes, but also behavioral competence tested in scenarios where the correct answer was not a bark but a boundary. Harrison existed like a ghost in his own building. He signed where he was told. He sat in meetings he would once have chaired and listened while others diagrammed the spine of a company he thought was a costume. When the time came to record the public apology, he stood behind a lectern without a logo and said words that cost him. "A pilot assaulted a black woman in first class," he began. "That sentence should not exist. The failure was not only his. It was ours. We will be transparent. We will be accountable. We will change." For the first time in years, his voice sounded like a human being's, not a brand's. Helios's legal team moved like a weather front. Notices to regulators, submissions of footage with metadata, union communications that were civil and sharp, a civil suit prepared with a quiet inevitability of tide. Frank met privately with his executive board and told them what his square jaw had not wanted to. "We cannot defend this. We defend our profession by not defending this." It was the hardest sentence he had said into a room in a decade. It was also the right one. Training became a new theater. In one session, Chloe stood on a low stage with a mock galley behind her and a volunteer in a pilot's jacket beside her. She walked crews through a moment most manuals pretend will never happen, a superior crossing a line. "You don't need to raise your voice," she said. "You need to raise a boundary. Use names. Use protocols. Use the cabin as your witness. Captain, step back. This is a safety concern. Please return to the cockpit." And then you escalate. Not to PR, not to a supervisor who plays golf with him, but to sanctuary. The system holds you. Someone asked how she hadn't stepped in sooner on 7:15. Her throat tightened. She told the truth. "I was afraid," she said. "I thought challenging him publicly would make me a problem. I stepped in after. After is better than never, but before is what saves people. This protocol is here so that the next time, the person you are at your best is the person you can be in the moment." They applauded not like a performance had ended, but like something had begun. Sterling drifted between calls he didn't want to answer and meetings he couldn't avoid. The union rep sat next to him at the first interview and said very little, the way a seatbelt says very little while doing its only job. The FAA's questions were specific and medical in their calm. Describe your decision-making sequence. At what point did you consider disengagement? He tried to talk about respect, about drift from standards, about how cabins had become undisciplined. The recorder on the table did not care about his narratives. It cared about timelines. At the end, an investigator thanked him for his candor, as if handing him a brochure about gravity. He went back to his room and watched the apology video. He did not recognize the airline speaking. He did not recognize the man staring from the mirror as someone the airline would hire. 3 weeks later, the Oversight Board convened its first formal review. Dr. Sharma presented heat maps, complaint latency plummeting, bystander interventions up, retaliation incidents at 0. But with an asterisk, that meant keep looking. She described the way crews had begun using precise language with each other. She told a story about a junior flight attendant who respectfully challenged a senior person's instruction and was thanked, not punished. "This is what culture feels like when it remembers what it's for," she said. In a small, unbroadcast meeting room, Serafina met Chloe for the first time without a cabin between them. No cameras, no grid, just 2 women and a pot of tea. "Congratulations," Serafina said, motioning to the chair opposite. "I didn't do enough," Chloe said, the confession she'd been carrying like contraband. "You did," Serafina said, "and now you'll help other people do more. That's the point." Chloe nodded, eyes bright, spine straighter. When the meeting ended, Serafina stood by a window and watched a line of planes taxi in choreography that pretended perfection. She knew better. Systems tend toward entropy. That's why people build spines. By month's end, Aura Aircraft carried a small addition to the safety card, a line beneath the oxygen mass diagrams that read, "If you feel unsafe due to behavior, Tell us. We will act. Tiny text, easily missed by the uninterested. A promise in print for those who needed to see it. The story traveled, as stories do, acquiring commentary in bad faith and good learning. But inside the company that had owned the scene, change attached itself to routines like a new gasket, unseen by most, critical to all. On a calendar 3 months in the future, a flight from New York to San Francisco blinked patiently at 9:15. In seat 1A, a reservation held a name it had learned to treat not with spectacle, but with competence. The spine was set. Now it had to hold. 3 months later, Winterlight made New York look polished and far away. Aura 213 from JFK to San Francisco idled at the gate with the patience of a machine that knew its job. In first class, the air smelled faintly of cedar and steam. Seat 1A waited with an empty glass, a coaster already placed. Serafina Hayes arrived without an entourage and with the same uniform she trusted. Charcoal hoodie, tailored joggers, white sneakers. The bruise had faded to memory, which is not the same as absence. She tucked her backpack under the ottoman, set her tablet on the armrest, and took the measure of the cabin the way a builder touches a wall to feel its studs. Small things were different. A discreet placard at the front bulkhead read, "If any interaction makes you feel unsafe or disrespected, tell us. We will act." It was the same promise printed now on the safety card, a single line beneath the oxygen masks, quiet and clear. Crew name tags had a second line in smaller font. Pronouns volunteered, not assumed. The welcome felt less like a performance and more like a contract. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes," said the flight attendant standing by the aisle. New uniform cut, new posture. Open without the hospitality flinch. Early 20s, bright eyes, nerves kept tidily behind her teeth. "I'm Marisol. Can I get you the pre-departure beverage?" "Sparkling water." "Lemon," Serafina said. Marisol set the glass on the coaster with unceremonious precision, not making a point of it, simply refusing to make a mistake. "We're glad to have you," she said, and meant it. Across the cabin, a man in a blazer tried to maneuver a bulky duffel into an overhead bin that had lived long enough to hate optimism. He grunted, then glanced at 1A and did a double take, the micro-calculation of recognition flickering in his eyes. He turned to Marisol. "Can't this go up there? I need easy access." Marisol held the line without hardening. "It exceeds the weight and dimensions, sir. I'll gate check it and return it plainside on arrival." He started to argue, then stopped himself, almost visibly recalling the safety card's new line. "Fine," he said, softer. "Thank you." Marisol took the bag, and as she moved forward, another attendant slid into her space, a relay instead of a gap. The choreography was smooth, practiced, more like a team than a hierarchy that tolerated soloists. An older woman in 2D smiled at Serafina. "I saw the video," she said, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. That was rude. I wanted to say I'm grateful for the changes." "Thank you," Serafina said, not rescuing the woman from her own awkwardness. People deserve the dignity of learning their way to better. A shadow fell across the aisle, not a threat this time, but a shape the cabin remembered. A man in a crisp uniform paused at the front, for bars on his epaulets, hair neat, eyes steady. Captain Liamose, nameplate clean, voice low. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard," he said to the cabin at large. The words were standard. The tone was not. It carried the awareness that the cockpit door was a boundary, not a stage. He nodded to the crew, equal nods, not ceremonial, and disappeared forward. "Cabin check," said a voice from the galley, and 2 attendants answered in sequence, calling back per procedure. The call and response sounded like a spine, practiced and plain. Marisol returned. "We're a few minutes from pushback," she said. "We've updated our in-flight service flow. If at any time something feels off, please tell me or any crew member. We'll fix it." "Who wrote the script?" Serafina asked. "Partly Dr. Sharma's team," Marisol said. "And Chloe." The name slipped out with affection. "She ran our de-escalation module. She's really good." "She is," Serafina said, and let herself feel the pleasure of a solved variable with a human face. Boarding closed. The door thunked shut with the ordinary finality of a decision that would now be carried out. The engine spooled, a familiar growl that belonged to physics more than pride. Taxi was uneventful in the new way. Announcement concise. Smiles not stretched thin enough to tremble. A baby fuss in 3A. The attendant in 3C crouched to eye level and asked the parent what would help, offering options rather than instructions. In the galley, the clink of glassware kept time with the checklist. As the plane lifted, Manhattan tilted and slid past. Serafina felt the brief, animal drop of her stomach, and then the seat pressed back into her bones. She closed her eyes and let the hum take over. Somewhere in some forum, someone would type that aura had gone soft. She knew better. Softness didn't hold a fuselage together. Strength did. Precision did. Systems that honored humans did. When the seatbelt sign went off, a small incident, a test the universe always arranges when it wants to know if you meant your speech, presented itself. The man in the blazer stood and leaned into the aisle to flag Marisol with 2 fingers, a gesture that used to mean, "You come here." She came, but she didn't bend. "I asked for almond milk," he said, irritation rehearsed. "This is oat." "I'm sorry about the mix-up," she said. "I'll swap it immediately." "It's not hard," he muttered, then, catching his own echo of something older, added, "I mean, thank you." Marisol nodded once, graceful. As she turned, the man's hand twitched, old habit rising, fingers starting to snap in the air to hurry her. He stopped the motion himself, looked down at his hand like it had betrayed him, and folded it into his lap. He exhaled. It was small. It mattered. Half an hour into the flight, the cockpit rang the galley chime twice. A new protocol. Communication that treated the cabin as intelligence rather than ornament. Marisol answered on the interphone, listened, then smiled. "Yes, Captain. Will do." She hung up and announced, "We'll hit a patch of expected chop. Please secure items." It was nothing dramatic. It was how respect sounds over a wire. In 1A, Serafina opened her tablet. A new legal memo from Ben slid into her inbox, dry as flour and twice as necessary. Union negotiations proceeding with less theater. Sterling's license review ongoing. The Oversight Board's first quarterly report trending in the right direction, with concerns flagged where they belonged. She skimmed, marked 3 items for deeper read, and checked a dashboard she'd had the data team build. Latency to intervene, cabin. Median down 61%. Complaint to action down 74%. Retaliation reports at 0 with 2 anonymous concerns in review. Perfect honesty is not an objective. Visibility is. "Ms. Hayes?" a voice said softly. She looked up. Chloe stood there in a blazer that fit like she'd grown into it, not put it on. Her hair was still pinned outlast a long day, but everything else about her looked less braced. She wore a small badge beneath her name, Training Lead. "Apologies for intruding," Chloe said, "but I was jump-seating aft and heard you were aboard. I want to say thank you." She hesitated. "And I wanted to tell you something." "Please," Serafina said, genuinely glad. "The other night," Chloe said, "we ran a scenario. Senior Purser versus Junior FA. Conflict over service during turbulence." The junior raised the protocol respectfully, and the purser stopped, looked at the crew, and said, "You're right. Sanctuary on." It took 8 seconds. She smiled. It felt like we'd moved the floor. "That's where culture lives," Serafina said. "At ground level." Chloe nodded. "Also, I wanted you to know, Captain Osei briefed us before boarding. He said, 'We are not here to pass judgment on passengers who don't look like the brochure. We are here to fly a safe aircraft and uphold dignity. If I cross a line, I expect you to call me back to it.'" He meant it. You could hear it. A warmth that wasn't triumph moved under Serafina's ribs. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. The rare pleasure being wrong about an inevitability. She had built and sold a company on the premise that data told the truth. Sometimes, so did people. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Chloe gave a small, conspiratorial grin. "Also, your coaster game is impeccable." She glanced at the glass, perfectly centered. I'm not saying I noticed you noticing," Serafina said, and they both laughed. The release of a memory neutralized by practice. Later, to Rockies. The cabin settled into its own weather. Headphones, open laptops, a row of feet that had learned to be quiet. A child in 3A peered over the divider to clouds. The attendant in 3C handed over a disposable camera and said, "Take 2 pictures you can't take on the ground." The parent mouthed, "Thank you." The child took 3. Harrison's internal memo hit inboxes mid-flight. Marisol read it on her break and blinked at a paragraph that sounded less like a brand and more like a person. "If you feel nervous about speaking up, know that I did too. The rules are now designed to make courage easier and retaliation harder. I should have done this sooner." He had been practicing humility, and for once, it didn't feel like a strategy. It felt like work. Approach into San Francisco came with last light and a scatter of gold on the bay. The seatbelt sign chimed. The cabin compacted into readiness. Captain Osei's voice came over the speakers. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing," he said, then added, not scripted, "Thank you for the care you've shown each other today." The wheels touched with thrum that lived somewhere between touch and declaration. Reverse thrust, deceleration, the long exhale of a trip that did what trips promise. Carry people from one life to the next without trying to tell them what those lives should be. At the gate, the door opened. The first-class cabin stood and shrugged on coats, adjusted scarves, remembered ground. The man in the blazer waited until Marisol approached and said, "I was rude earlier. I'm sorry." She accepted it without making it a scene. Chloe waited by 1A. "Safe onward, Ms. Hayes." "You too," Serafina said, then paused. "How are you sleeping?" "Better," Chloe said, surprised by her own honesty. "Work feels tall but steady." "Tall is fine," Serafina said. "Spines are tall." She stepped onto the jet bridge, the same kind of corridor as before, carpet the same uncanny shade of institutional. But it didn't feel like a limbo now. It felt like a passage between systems that were learning from each other. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ben. Board Q1 metrics approved. Anna says the latency curve is beautiful. "Dinner?" "Later," she replied. "Take a night off." "Tell Anna the curve is hers." She reached the terminal. People moved with their usual indifference and their private hopes. Somewhere, Robert Sterling was discovering what it meant to live inside a consequence. Somewhere else, a junior FA was practicing a sentence that would keep someone safe and would keep her job safe too. Systems were moving. That was the point. Not to punish one man and call it a day. To build rules that outlasted everyone in the room. As she walked, she passed an Aura billboard, new copy, almost boring in its confidence. "We don't guess what respect looks like. We train for it." She didn't slow down. The work wasn't in the ad. It was in the cockpit chime, the interphone phrasing, the exact angle of a glass on a small wooden ledge. Back in the cabin, Marisol cleared 1A for the next turn. She picked up the empty glass in the coaster, smiled at how perfectly aligned they'd been, and moved on. There would be another flight, another seat, another person with a life none of them could see. The promise wasn't to know their story. It was to make sure the rules never assumed the worst of it. Out on the ramp, the engine spooled down. Evening rolled over the airport like a hand smoothing a wrinkled shirt. Planes arrived. Planes departed. The world kept choosing, over and over, between spectacle and structure. On Aura 213, a coaster waited to be set again. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.